My name is Costantinos. I've been working in different organizations, the United Nations in New York, as senior policy advisor. I've also worked with the African Union as chairperson of the African Union Anti-Corruption Advisory Board. Besides, I've worked in the private sector, and I also taught at the university, master's and PhD in public policy. And I continue to work on teaching and private sector work and also policy advice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, now to the people who are probably hearing the name Ubuntu for the first time, maybe they might not really have a good grasp of it or what it really means. Can we give them a brief explanation? What really is Ubuntu?
Well, Ubuntu, it came from the Zulu language, Ubuntu, Ngumuntu, Ngabantu. And basically it means we are people through other people. And basically it shows the kind of commonality between peoples, their cultures, their history, their language, and of course the kind of kinship that you have within communities. And you become a person because you are part of a community. You serve a community, the community serves you. And therefore, this is a kind of a participatory paradigm within which we locate ourselves as human beings in a community and in society. In that sense, it also brings the idea of leadership, where traditional African leadership was more of consensus building between community members, and eventually leaders emerge out of that consensus in terms of political views, in terms of economic advancement, in terms of social relations. And I think, of course, Ubuntu has been used in different contexts. Reverend Desmond Tutu used it in theology. President Mandela used it in politics, and many advanced people have used it also in management and in social relations. On the other side, the Linux open software has also called it Ubuntu in a way that it is freely shared and that it is in the service of community. So basically, it is the kind of community cohesion that shows you how people can advance themselves united. They stand, and of course, if they are on their own, they become independent, but they have to deal with the consequences. So Ubuntu basically is a kind of sharing within the community that has been exercised in different languages, in different cultures, in different ways across Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Costantino. From your explanation, it appeared very beautiful as an idea, as a philosophy, we might also say. Can we, in this sense, say that it's something that cut across different culture in Africa, in that is deeply rooted in that the people of, I'm asking this question because if it is deeply rooted in Africa, it means the people of Africa, including the leaders, should have sort of have a basic understanding of faith. Or is this something that is only for some part of Africa, for some elite, as it were? I'm trying to understand that.
Well, you see, of course, Ubuntu is used basically in reference to South Africa and to Zulu language. But different African cultures have been using their own management styles for as long as humanity has been in this world. The fact remains that African communities were thriving even before some of the European countries were populated with people and with cities. If you see, for example, North America, the kind of North America today that we see, the kind of history they talk about is 200 years, 250 years. But here, Africa has been the birthplace of humanity. And of course, it is Africans that have been taken through slavery and other means that were the means to develop Europe and North America. And therefore, what we can see is that Africans had vibrant cultures and self-management in the political, social, and economic arena, where kingdoms like Aksum in Ethiopia and Eritrea, Dahomey, Shaka Zulu in South Africa, had thriving kingdoms that were basically dependent on African philosophies that advanced the kind of participation and commonality that I mentioned earlier. Of course, there have been violent wars between cultures in Africa. Some of them, the leaders want to expand their territory. In other cases, they want to defend themselves. But the point of the fact is that Africa had these cultures. For example, if we take the Aksumite kingdom in Ethiopia, we have 3,000 years of recorded history, and during this history, the Aksumite kingdom had naval routes that it traded with India and Europe. It had the possibility of even expanding its territory. It had the kind of management that we're talking about today in terms of globalization. These people were doing it very well. Eventually, all this was completely decimated because of the scramble for Africa with European powers in Berlin in the 1800s to divide Africa, because Africa had rich resources. These resources include human resources who can work, mineral resources, land resources, water resources, and all this were the basis within which the colonial administrations came and technically destroyed the kind of indigenous cultures in terms of self-management we had. So, but in Africa, where we have over 2,000 languages, which would represent literally 2,000 cultures, had different ways of using the Ubuntu philosophy. And this has yet to be studied, because we're lucky that Ubuntu has been studied and used by different people in South Africa, but this has to come out in a major way. I know UNESCO has been doing phenomenal work in this area. A colleague of mine, who was the deputy head of UNESCO, was heading this project. And that African history has to be written so well that some of these historical facts can be used today to improve the human condition in Africa today. We're talking about Africa's underdevelopment, Africa's being dependent on aid, Africa dependent on debt, but Africa has the resources, both human, natural resources, to be able to advance itself. The missing element is the kind of community cohesion and participation we had to be able to develop the kind of management system that would take us out of poverty and dependency on the West. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. You see, the aspect that you taught just now, which related to the deep African culture that is not even talked about, even among many Africans. Nobody actually dare to talk about the fact that the origin of everything that we know as civilization, the philosophy, they are actually coming from Africa. It appeared as if it was an empty land, as if we needed to learn everything from other people, which was not true. If you understand history, knowing that, because it becomes even logical, no? Because if Africa is a home of humanity, it is natural that everything is just coming from there. So for us as a people, I think we need to do ourselves the service of trying to know where we are coming from, because it is very, very important. Otherwise, we will not be able to find our place in the world, because we will just be pretending to be something we are not. All right. Now, looking at this beautiful idea, this Ubuntu, because it made me actually think of, for example, of an environmental activist in Nigeria. His name is Kensaro Wewa, who is now dead. You know, at the time, he was basically saying that we should respect nature, because he was, of course, talking of the oil exploration in the Niger Delta. At the time, it was not very popular today, this the global warming and the rest of it, but that is basically what he was fighting against. That we, as human beings, we are taken from nature. We should learn to respect nature. Because human, if we are going back to Ubuntu now, is the idea that everything is connected. The land, the human being, the air, the animal, all of us are connected to make the community. If we decide to eliminate part of it, then we are no longer complete. So that if we have a minimum understanding of civilization, it should be a crime to destroy any part of the world, because whichever part of the world you destroy, you will definitely reap the reward someday. Looking at this beautiful idea of Ubuntu, what would it mean for African leaders to be guided by these simple principles, where the human being is put at the center of it? Of course, this will mean that in the policies that are being signed, in the infrastructure that are being developed, in the contracts that are being signed with foreign aid, that they reflect the interest of the local people so that they can survive. That is the question, sir.
Well, you see, the important issue here today is we have to look at the genesis of the current crop of African leaders. The current crop of African leaders have been designed literally by Western colonialists after the independence of African nations. Most of them were educated in the West. Most of them were brought back, like people like Leopold Senghor, and most West African leaders who were they were even in parliament, in European parliaments, in French parliaments. So after these leaders came and set the vision of an African unity, to define Africa, to develop Africa, they set up the Organization of African Unity. And the Organization of African Unity, which was formed with about 32 head of states, independent African states at that time, had a broader vision of bringing Africa together, bringing a united Africa to be able to combat any form of insurrection from outside. The problem was, after this leadership, we had more than 110 military coups and counter coups in Africa. The military literally destroyed Africa, and it keeps destroying it even today. So the traditional forms of leadership that we're talking about in terms of Ubuntu may have remained in communities, but it's been completely destroyed when the states were formed. Some of them were nation states, some of them were multinational states. And Europeans also carved out Africa according to their own will. And the borders we have today, even one that was recognized by the Organization of African Unity at the beginning of the OAU formation, was to take the colonial borders as legitimate borders of countries in Africa. So the kind of cultural traditions we had in management and in governance have been transformed so many times through kingdoms that were formed, later on through states that were formed after independence, and then after the military governments, which wreaked havoc across the continent. As I said, we had over 110 military coups, successful military coups in this continent. Now, coming, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was a movement for democracy in Africa, but much remains to be realized, because as we see, we have leaders who've been there for more than 30 years. Some examples are, for example, Gaddafi in Libya, Bashir in Sudan, and some of them still, countries like Cameroon, the Congo, are being run by the same people who've been there almost 3 decades. So today, the kind of governance we see in Africa is dominated by political parties and individuals who like to run for elections indefinitely. And the kind of expression of democracy we have in Africa are only elections. The necessary fundamentals for democracy, like civic education, voter education, the formation of an economic society, that should precede the ability of countries to undertake legitimate elections, free and fair elections, informed elections where people would be in a position to choose. Egypt is a very good example, for example. Mubarak has been there and has seen 7 US presidents. After popular uprising, Mubarak was removed, and then President Morsi was elected as the popular president of Egypt. Then President Morsi was removed completely because he comes from the Muslim Brotherhood. So there was a major coup d'etat, and after the coup d'etat, we have a military general who is going to run Egypt until 2034 through different means. So when you have elections as the only expression of democracy, this means they are liable to be manipulated. And when they're manipulated, the voters don't have an opportunity even to check whether their vote has been done properly. So rigging elections has become a common issue in Africa today. So the current crop of leaders we have in Africa, one, they want to continue. In fact, constitutions which had 2-term limits have been changed through referenda and other means to continue to be leaders of that country. In some cases, this might be probably the kind of legitimate situation you have on the ground. But in other cases, it is just to take on the the leaders' time to go on forever. Even the Moem Rahe Foundation has now gives rewards to leaders who present themselves as democratic and who leave their office on time, and also present the next administration with a peaceful transition. But if you look back into Africa, in the late 1800s, Emperor Melik of Ethiopia fought the Italians. That was the first African victory against the Berlin Agreement to colonize Africa. The Europeans were completely humiliated. That became an icon for African leaders, including President Kenyatta. When he set up the Mau Mau movement, he wanted to emulate Menelik to show that Africans can govern themselves and Africans can free themselves from colonialism. And again, if we take Ethiopia, another example, Emperor Haile Selassie, when Italians invaded again with heavy modern weapons, he went to the League of Nations. I think his capacity to make Ethiopia a member of the League of Nations at the time was a key point in the diplomatic history of this nation. Eventually, Emperor Haile Selassie got the support of the same Western powers to get rid of the Italians and install himself as a king here. The point is, kings and feudal lords have their own tremendous limitations, but they have brought Africa to a point where the current crop of leaders could have pushed it a bit further. Another area that's a problem with using African philosophy in terms of governance is the kind of corruption we have. African leaders became looters. African leaders became greedy. We see their children now being kept in European and American courts for looting their own countries. So, and Africa loses about what, $158 billion a year through illicit financial flows. So these are the kind of crops of political and business leaders we have developed in Africa that becomes a cancer in society, that becomes the biggest detriment to Africa's development. As I mentioned before, DRC would have been the richest nation in the world with over $24 trillion of wealth in minerals. but today it's one of the poorest countries in the world, and its people don't even have peace. When we hear about disease like Ebola, we hear about DRC. When we hear about disease like cholera, we hear about DRC. And today, even to protect ourselves from the COVID pandemic, we have to depend on the assistance of the West to buy us the vaccines, to vaccinate our own population. And therefore, I think African leadership has miserably failed so far. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Professor. You see, now this is where I usually do come to the part of the responsibility, as a people. I remember in 2010, I wrote a book that I titled "Underdevelopment in Africa: My Hands Are Clean." In that book, of course, I talked about our responsibility as a people. Of course, not denying the fact that Europeans have had and continue to have a serious influence in keeping Africa in the state of underdevelopment that we have today. But of course, this will not succeed without the collaboration, the cooperation of some African elites. Now, these African elites, whether in the past or in the present, they understand the same concept that we are talking about here, this concept of being brother. Because when we talk of being brother or the brotherhood as it were, which of course Marcus Garvey populated before other people that went to study abroad, then brought back to Africa. But it was an idea that was already an African idea, what I'm trying to say here is that it's not as if it's an alien thing for them. It's not as if they don't know. But why are they choosing to sacrifice their people for their personal ego? Because if we are looking at the spirit of Ubuntu, the spirit of fraternity, the spirit of brotherhood, the spirit of trying to make sure that that the human being is at the center of our life, of our collective existence. Now, I'll give you an instance. If you go to typical villages in Africa, this idea that we are talking about of Ubuntu is evidence, is place side. You can see it there. But if you go to cities in Africa, any type of city that you can go, whether you are going to Lagos, Johannesburg, or you are going to Accra, it's a replication of anti-people almost. So that you are coming to see a people who actually have the value, everything they need to be able to survive. But while we are pretending to become who we are not, by developing a system that is not our own, and we haven't even allowed it to develop, and we didn't develop our own, we are hanging somewhere. It will be reality and illusion. So if this African elite, our brothers, who are there for our leaders, know these principles, these fundamental principles of Ubuntu, of fraternity, why are they not doing it? Why are they instead deciding to sell out their people?
If you look at the African continent today, we have several conflicts going on. You can count many countries, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Cameroon, Ethiopia, to some degree, Egypt. And then in Western Africa, you have insurgencies like the Boko Haram. In Mozambique, we have another ISIS affiliate. I can't count them. We literally have some form of conflict in 39 countries in Africa. These conflicts are bred by legitimate concerns in community and society. Those who create this kind of disobedience to the leaders, to the current crop of African leaders, are then joined by other people who want to promote other philosophies and other ambitions. It could be religion, it could be ethnicity, it could be simple plundering public wealth. So I think the problem that we have today is Ubuntu has been exercised properly by President Mandela. And President Mandela is probably one of the few leaders in Africa who only served one term and said, enough is enough. He gave in and he left. He could have been an important example to African leaders. And of course, after they leave the presidency, these former presidents could have tremendous influence in shaping the morality of society, in shaping the kind of progressive society that we have through the speech they make, through the kind of lives they live. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Most African leaders actually never survive after they leave office. Either they are in jail or they are killed. We have only very few African leaders who have exercised that, and these are the ones that have been awarded by the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. That foundation now couldn't even find African leaders to give its prizes because of their successful achievement of the kind of indicators that the foundation sets for the prize it provides. So what you can see today is African leaders are in crisis, and that's why the continent is also in crisis. We talk about the debt crisis, we talk about Western colonialism, we talk about the Chinese invasion of Africa. So we're not even independent even today. That's why we talked about neo-colonialism. And now, of course, because of globalization, the kind of African identity is perishing. But as you said, in communities, in rural communities, which are not even in the reach of their local presidents, still these cultures flourish. These cultures function because they don't have any support from anywhere, including their own governments. And therefore, they have to survive on their own. To be able to survive, they use these traditional indigenous governance systems to be able to go on. I did a study for the African Development Bank on indigenous peoples of Africa. We have about 50 million indigenous people. And of course, the African Development Bank was a bit concerned when it finances big projects like roads, railways, dams, and everything. These indigenous people are left out. Their land is taken away, or probably when a dam is built, the land is filled with water without their consensus. And therefore, in that study, what I found out is that people are just living the way they have been living probably 2,000 years ago. These indigenous systems are still capable of working this. But the problem is the kind of adaptive strategies they have, for example, to manage climate change, are not sufficient today because the problems are not the problems that existed 2,000 or 1,000 years ago. Now they're more complex. The resources are being taken by other people. Governments are putting pressures on their resources. Their trees have been cut for sale by corporations. Their minerals have been taken out and sold, for which they don't benefit anything. Even our wildlife parks have very little participation of local communities and provide little benefit to local communities. And traditionally, wildlife and human beings have lived together in harmony, maintaining our environment. So when it comes to African cities, this is completely lost. In fact, what makes African cities more popular is their crime. Lagos, Johannesburg, Nairobi, Addis Ababa, all these have become breeding grounds for criminals in the African continent. This shows you that the kind of community kinship, the community oneness, and the kind of community rootedness in certain cultures has been completely dissipated to the point that it's disappearing. We're developing a new culture of looting, a new culture of theft, a new culture of corruption within these major cities. And these major cities are the source of our politicians. And once these politicians are there, we see this embarrassing situation in which elections are rigged, in which people are killed on broad daylight by government forces for simply undertaking issues that are in the constitution of these countries, namely free speech, freedom of association. We saw what happened in Senegal recently, what's really happening in Ethiopia. These political crises that are coming are basically because African leaders are not up to it anymore. So when we talk about leadership, it's not just a question of the one person that becomes the president. She or he are not the only ones. It's the team that comes with it. And then there are supporting technocratic and bureaucratic machinery that comes behind this leadership that are benefiting from the system that creates all this havoc. So in a sense, it's not just African leaders that can change this. It's a change that should take place in a kind of a cultural revolution to go back to where we were, to learn from our past history, and also to develop the necessary literature and teach our young people that history so that when they grow up, they will be part and parcel of that community that's going to emerge. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for that. That explanation has really been very rich for people who are here trying to understand. You see, of course, I'm going to come to the recommendation at the end of the podcast. But right now, I'm still sort of concerned about one aspect, which is I want to repeat it again, the responsibility of the people. You know, sometimes some people might even say, there was even the argument at the point that, okay, because in Africa, people are not educated, that is why. But I sort of find that one very difficult to accept, in that most of the people that are in the position of authority in Africa, they have a very good education. Like you already pointed out in the beginning, some of them have been educated in the West before they came to Africa and then take position. Because the whole thing is a game, no? I understand that. I'm not like saying that we are completely naive of it. But the point is that the game should be played also. If I have to participate in a game, I have to also understand the rules. If the rules is not in my interest and I keep on playing it, I should be stupid to think that I'm going to have salvation playing a game for the interest of other people. So these educated Africans, so to say, because most of them, they are very educated, that are in the position of authority. They are not illiterate. They know how to, they should have the basis of what is really going on in the world. So I repeat again, I'm trying to look at the responsibility here of our responsibility, both of the people that are in the position of authority and also the people that are basically observing, like you, like me. Okay, you have been in the position of authority. Maybe I will not use you as an example, but like me, who have never been in the position of authority, like the market woman, like the man in the bank. Like, I'm looking at the ordinary African people. Do we have a responsibility in trying to shape this future where, because Africa, we are basically suffering. We are suffering in the midst of abundance. We are not lacking human resources. We are not lacking natural resources. That is, our continent is blessed. Yes, we are suffering. For more than 500 years of the relationship between Europe and Africa, it has been based on help. Europe helping Africa. This is the narration. But of course, it's falsehood. And I cannot pretend to expect this narration to change on its own. I should not expect the European to change this narration. If this narration is seen in its own interest, it should be my duty, because I should have my interest. What is my interest? So what is the responsibility of the ordinary African people, the intellectual, those who are educated, that are participating in this stealing, in this looting of our resources, in this industrialization of poverty? They're basically using poverty to keep Africa the way it is. And it's a system they are building in. They are feeding in a big machine. So what is our responsibility on that?
The problem is, after independence, most African countries, the state has been captured by a few groups, and it continues to be captured. If you see countries like Tanzania, it lost its great leader only a few days ago, but it's one party that's been running Tanzania since independence. South Africa is one party that's been running South Africa since independence, and I can give you more and more examples of this, Cameroon and others. So the problem is the ordinary people, the village people, don't even have a say. And any effort for themselves to organize politically is dealt with so viciously that nobody wants to do it. That's why some of them, they take up arms, create guerrilla warfare, and try to overturn the governments. Central African Republic, the scene of misery. As a matter of fact, recently during the elections, the opposition groups were trying to march using weapons of mass destruction into the capital. So the problem is the ordinary African cannot have a role unless you have the system in place. And that's the problem we have when we talk about our development. We lack systems thinking here. And this has been deliberately done. It's not just African leaders that are doing this. They've been supported by foreign powers, by foreign companies, by mafia organizations, by arms traders. And therefore, within this situation, the people of Africa are kept hostage, complete hostage of their own, by their own leaders, and through mechanisms that come from developed nations. As I said earlier, Central African Republic, DRC, they have plenty of minerals, but who benefits from these minerals? People are dying of hunger there. People are dying of killings by rebel forces. These rebel forces came up because they couldn't handle the central government, especially in DRC. Literally, before DRC, it was Zaire. And Zaire, Mobutu Sese Seko literally ran it like his own household. He was ejected by Kabila, and then his son came in. Nothing much has changed in DRC. So I think what the most important thing that is coming up now is the international community has new visions of the world. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about a common earth for all of us to live in. We're talking about human rights more boldly now in different capacities. Now, this global movement is sinking into Africa. And African elite, we have more educated children in Africa today. Our universities are graduating thousands and thousands of students every year. If we take Ethiopia, for example, you have over 250,000 kids graduating every year from universities, from second degrees, from PhDs. And therefore, these kids are my hope that they're going to change because of the existence of social media now. They see what the developed world is doing. If you've seen, for example, the Afro-Arab Spring in Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Syria, Egypt, in Yemen, of course, these have been manipulated by the West to their own benefit. Otherwise, it were people's uprisings to change the system to what you're mentioning now, to have some kind of equality, empowerment of the ordinary person to be able to exercise their rights of citizenship. Otherwise, citizenship in Africa is a matter of fact, but we don't have that kind of citizenship rights. We write constitutions in Africa, but our citizens are not informed about their rights and privileges and also their responsibilities that the constitution puts on them. Now, with these educated young people coming up and using social media, they're using it as a process by which they will want the African nations to rise up against this kind of decadent leaders. And so far, they have got rid of course, Tunisia has been there for many years. They have got rid of Mubarak in Egypt, Libya. But the sad situation is the interference from the West has put Libya, for example, into a phantom state. Literally, it's a state run by 100 guerrilla forces today. Recently, we've seen some improvements in the negotiations that are taking place to form a government. But the one successful country probably among the Afro-Arab Spring countries is Tunisia, where some kind of democratic movement is taking place in a peaceful manner. Other African countries in sub-Saharan Africa will need to have this kind of energized youth movements to be able to transform the population, to inform the population, to create the kind of vision of a new society, a society that's based on African cultures and traditions. And once the African youth can do this, that will be the time when the African Renaissance will come, the African development will come, and African economic prosperity can be based on the resources Africa has already. The problem we have today is Africans are choosing to run away from their own continent and go to Europe for a better life. We see them, most of them sinking in the Mediterranean Sea, some of them sold as slaves in Libya. But the point is, this is the kind of leadership and governance system in Africa we have, where our young people have chosen to leave the continent instead of trying to change it. And I think some good thinkers in the continent have to come up with this kind of movements. Traditionally, these movements, especially after independence, were based on negritude, for example, which started in Western Africa. We had Harambe in East Africa, and several, memes and advocacy themes that brought people to feel that they are participating as citizens of a political society. But today, that is regressing again. And with this regression, since our African leaders, most of them are supported by external forces, external finance, external arms traders, the few people that they co-opt into their system will silence or try to silence African voice as long as they can. After killing so many people, there was a genocide in Darfur. Of course, the United Nations Security Council has not called it a genocide, but 350,000 people have been killed by the Janjaweed led by the government. This is how our leaders are maintaining power in this continent today. And therefore, to change this, the young Africans coming out of the different universities now, and the global move towards a sustainable world, and of course, a human rights situation in which every human being can be respected, especially when we have now in our hands mobile phones where we can communicate in social media, then that societal transformation will come in the near future. And that's my great hope.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. You see, now, I try to look at the consequences, because now we have talked about bad leadership in Africa, which is evident. Now we can see it in very many parts of the continent. Now, of course, we are calling the entire continent to question here, because the statistics is a support of the fact that the majority of the leaders we have in the continent are either corrupt or just irresponsible, or maybe they're just there like a kind of running a shadow system, in that they don't really represent the people. I think I've said it more than a number of times, because leadership should be a very simple thing. The United States citizens elect their leader. That leader represents them. If the United States Army are anywhere in the world, they are there for the interest of the United States, the taxpayer, the people, their power, what they represent in this world. So if we have a country also like maybe in Nigeria, we have a country in Africa like in Nigeria, or we say Ghana, or we say Congo, the leadership in that place should represent the interest of those people. Like, for example, looking at Congo, it should be about the resources that are available in Congo, how to extract those resources and be used for the interest of the Congolese people. It should not be to service the interest of somewhere in Belgium or in US or in China. That is not leadership. That is stealing. That is stealing the people and destroying the future of these people. So now, if we don't change, if we just keep on playing the old game, then we are going to be getting the same old result continuously. So the question actually I'm going to be driving at right now is the consequence of bad leadership. So when we have bad leadership, what is the consequence to the people? Or maybe we can say to the future of the country?
You see, I'm a trustee of an organization called Africa Humanitarian Action, and we've supported more than 22 million refugees and internally displaced people in Africa. These are the consequences of bad leadership. People have been displaced from literally every country in Africa. Some of the countries that have been quiet in this sense have tried to deal with displacement more carefully. But the kind of problems you have, for example, in the Sahel belt today is a problem you'll never see. The crimes that are being committed are very, very bad. Recently, we heard news on Nigeria where children have been abducted from schools. Nigeria has had a big army. As a matter of fact, it had multiple military coups and counter coups. When a democratic government was set up with the coming of President Obasanjo, there were high hopes that things would change. Nigeria has resources. More than 50% of its population is urban, and probably per capita, it has the highest level of university graduates and intellectuals in the continent, probably more than the entire sub-Saharan Africa combined. But why is Nigeria having so many problems? Why is Boko Haram flourishing in Nigeria? Why are they just looting the public, killing people, burning churches, and taking kids out of schools, schoolgirls? Chibok girls were initially, and then of course it continued. And we hear that the government is paying ransom or something to stop this. This is the effect of bad leadership. When community fails completely, these children should have been protected by their own community. These children should have been the subject of the community they live in. And these are in rural Nigeria. It's not Lagos or it's not Abuja. And we see this kind of arenas of human displacement literally everywhere. The other thing is violence against women is very rampant in Africa. South Africa reports probably the highest amount. This is also the effect of bad governance. The lack of human development in Africa, which means lack of education, health, and proper life for many Africans, is a failure of governance. Our young people must not be just taught mathematics, science, and language in schools, but they must be taught in critical thinking to know who they are, to know how they contribute to the community, and to know exactly where they are in the community, coming back to Ubuntu. And therefore, when they are trained in critical thinking, then they can change their society. But if we give them education in legal affairs, public policy, medical science, engineering, we're creating robots out of human beings to go and get employed in companies, to work for companies. So we don't have the kind of leadership education where young people can think critically and see how they can change their community, how they can transform their community. I tell you, we cannot have states that would assign military officers in every household to keep everybody safe. That shows you the complete failure of society. So it is only communities that can keep their own peace. And through community development and good leadership in the communities that we can stop the problems like Boko Haram or the ISIS-affiliated operatives of Al-Shabaab or the ones in Mozambique. So African leaders, they come to the African Union meetings, they have beautiful declarations, hundreds of them. Literally none of them have been implemented so far. This year, their declaration is to silence the guns in Africa. But where have silenced the guns in Africa? Nowhere. Now Ethiopia is in a war, Sudan is in a war, South Sudan is in a war, Cameroon is in a war, Central African Republic is in a war, DRC is in a war, Somalia is in a war. You can go on. So the problem is, if they're going to silence the guns, there are some basic issues of policy implementation they have to follow. Some commitment they have to put in terms of resources, in terms of also what should be done. But these people today, these head of states and leaders, are just signing documents that the AU Secretariat draft for them. And frankly, if you look at the African Union, it's not silencing guns. You know, the United Nations Charter says, we the people of the United Nations. The African Union Charter says, we, the heads of state and governments of Africa. It's a club of the state leaders. It's not a club of Africans. And there are fundamental issues that we need to look into in terms of our leaders having full commitment and willingness to be able to create a peaceful Africa, silenced guns in Africa, and of course better human development in this continent where it can be a magnet for other countries to migrate into Africa instead of Africans trying to migrate to other countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That'd be really rich. You see, you touched on a point that I'm definitely going to have to ask you some questions about. I cannot just let it go like that, no. Especially when you made mention of the independence, no, because it will appear that African countries we are independent, we are free, but we're not really free. We're not really running our system. It's more like, sorry to use the word continuous. You look like a kind of a shadow government. That is what we have, no, because we have leaders that are not representing us. That is what I mean by that. We need leaders that can represent the people. I think it should be like a week ago or so, I did a solo podcast where I was trying to describe what leaders should be. If you are a leader, you really need to be running with the people to find the solution. And I can tell you that if there is any single leader in Africa who is really on the ground, like maybe, for example, like Thomas Sankara, that is there on the field with the population, they will definitely find a solution to the problem. But we have these people that are inside their tinted cars, they are in their protected building. Now, there's another thing that I discovered when I visited Nigeria, no? Is that the houses that people are building, it look like mini prisons. They look at it like modernity. It is not modernity. There is nothing modern about it. You are building prison for yourself. Now, that have never really been the design of our architecture. Because the architecture is also part of our civilization in that you have a house, I have a house, but between your house and my house, there is a connection. If you have need for me, you can easily call me. I don't need to jump on top of the fence. Now, this is what I mean by prison. They build the house, maybe it's relatively small or it can even be big. They build a very high fence. Now, this is a metaphor also because it is physical. This is a physical structure that we find around in many urban cities in Africa, Nigeria to be specific, because that is what I found. No? It's a representation of the society. Because there are too many armed robbers. I'm not really referring to the poor guys on the street who do not have anything, so they go to steal. I'm talking of the international and the national armed robber, the stealing, the educated armed robbers who continue to steal from the treasure of the people. Nobody is safe anymore. But if we go back to, anyway, we will not have time to look at that, which is our traditional African system of government. You see, there was a direct relationship between the leader and the lead. So that I don't want somebody having the concept that we are just new to leadership. No, we are not new to leadership. We have been governing ourselves for thousands and thousands of years, even before other parts of the world could even understand what is the basic concept of administrating a state. If we don't know how to do it anymore, it's not because we have never done it before. It's because we have miseducated ourselves. So now we are lost. But we are coming from a very rich culture, really, of Ubuntu, of a people, of a community, of living together. I want to ask you something. So it doesn't appear like everything is bad about Africa. Is there some good leaders, maybe in the recent past or in the long distant past, good ones that you can make mention of and also show us why these are good leaders? I want somebody to learn that we are not just saying that there have never been anything good about leadership in Africa. It's just that we have too many armed robbers in the position of authority.
Yeah, you see, the main problem is history is written by historians who are loyal to the current governance system. And if you've seen, every African leader who comes blames the leader before them for wrecking the country. And of course, most of the military coups, 110 of them that have been undertaken successfully in Africa, all the soldiers were saying these are looters, they have taken government money, they have not done development for the people, but the military was much worse than them. They literally killed even the indigenous governance systems that we had. And of course, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was a movement around 1990s for the resurrection of some form of democratic credentials. But the democracy that we tried to bring into Africa was parachuted by the West into African cultures. We didn't know how African cultures would react to this, where we have ethnic groups, religious groups, and different societal formations. In Ethiopia, for example, you have the Gada system in the Oromos, where this has been the mainstay, this has been well documented. And in fact, the Gada system is now a UNESCO heritage, or it was going to be a UNESCO heritage. So I think now in Africa, we can mention probably President Mandela. He brought South Africa out of obscurity. He created a balance between the Black African population that were oppressed by the whites under apartheid. There came some kind of a detente between the white and Black population. The economy continued to thrive, although the Black population had yet to see the benefits of this change. But the fact is, after President Mandela, the country continues to exist as a rich country, as a developed nation, literally. So today, probably the only example we can give is President Mandela. Frankly, we can't have so many presidents or ex-presidents that have contributed to the renaissance of the African population. There are governments that have been given the Mo Ibrahim Prize, presidents, ex-presidents, but they were given the prize for respecting their term limits and, of course, for leaving office when they lost the elections. But if we are looking at a deeper consequence of leadership, where Africans would have, let's say, 3 meals a day, proper shelter, proper health facilities, proper educational facilities, transport facilities, and also the ability to be able to participate in governing their own society, I don't think we can have an example that has been set in this continent in the modern era. In the pre-modern era, of course, we have hundreds of examples. That's why I said this has to be left for historians to undertake the in-depth analysis of societies in Africa, especially the indigenous peoples that amount to 50 million in the African continent, since they are still intact as communities. They have not been interrupted by the modern state so much so that they could lose their cultures. But definitely there are arenas that we can pick from this, and then we can combine this with modern democratic credentials of whatever you call them, civic education, citizen education, elections, the rule of law, human rights, and others, and then come up with this. Look at Turkey, for example, withdrawing from the Violence Against Women Convention of Treaty of the European Union. What they're showing is that they want to continue violating their own women. That's why you have so many demonstrations against it today. But in Africa, we cannot even respect international treaties that our governments have signed. UN treaties, African Union treaties, declarations of principle, all this remain only within the foreign affairs ministries of the African governments. And therefore, my hope is that the young people in Africa would peacefully transform this continent into something that we would see would be livable. Otherwise, the problem will continue. And now, there is a global move towards populism. We see it in Europe, we see it in the United States. Literally, President Trump came as a populist. Populism has a base in discriminating society. Populism has its base in creating a few wealthy people and a lot of poor people. But these politicians are using the poor people's vote to be able to come and serve the interests of the few. So that populism in Africa could come in the form of ethnicity. We have seen the Rwanda example of genocide between two tribes. This will continue in different parts of Africa. Therefore, to change this, we have a continental organization called the African Union, which really needs good leadership to be able to infuse countries of the necessity to be able to listen to their own people. If Cameroon now is fighting its own Anglophone population because they want to secede, because they want to be respected, then you have a president there who has been there for how many years? I don't know, 40 years? So there is a war going on. Today there is an election in the Republic of Congo. How many years has the president been there? And frankly, under this kind of situation, where you have tremendous amount of state capture by the state leaders, then what individuals can do is probably create guerrilla groups and fight. The kind of peaceful transition, the kind of non-violent transformation that we see in history, we don't have much example in this except Gandhi probably, and Martin Luther King in the United States. The societal and governance change has been always very violent. And because the state has a total monopoly on the means of violence, using what they call the rule of law or the legal regime, then others cannot use it as the state uses it. So they'll have to go to illegal means of doing this. To come out of this, my hope is that with the development of technology and communication systems, the African youth would eventually know whom to elect. They would ensure that it's free and fair election, and eventually they would make sure that the leadership that comes in Africa would be serving the people of Africa and not their own families and themselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I appreciate all the experience that you have been sharing with us, and I know that the people that are watching you, they are benefiting from it. You see, by a good leader, we're actually referring to a people-oriented leader. Of course, it doesn't mean that these leaders will never make mistakes. We're not looking for angels. We're not looking for people that are coming from the outer space. We need a human being, real human being, who know the yearnings of the people. Just to give you an instance, of course, we are moving towards the solution, and just before we go there, I'm trying to wrap up some issues there. You see, of course, you even mentioned the Obasanjo administration, which we can even say was good, no? But the point really is that these guys, they are just playing game with the people of Nigeria, more than 200 million people. In that they create their own problem to solve, or what is generally referred to as problem solution strategy. It's a political strategy that the politicians use. They use it everywhere. But just that of Nigeria is almost too much. In 1999, as we're moving towards 1999, when Nigeria was having its last breath of military dictatorship, the problem of Nigeria were already well defined. Light. There was no electricity in Nigeria. It's a shame that Nigeria cannot boast of 24-hour electricity. Now, what kind of economy should develop in a country without light? Take out light in Italy, in Germany, or France. The economy will crumble. that the Nigerian people are still managing to survive with their own generator, poisoning themselves, and so people die from it, is because the people have a strong resilience to survive. For the part of the government, they have been cheating and continuously cheating. And they play so much on these divide and rule strategies, the Yoruba, the Hausa, the Igbo, but actually it's nonsense. It's because they are not responsible. Because if you are a responsible leader, you should really understand that nobody cares where you are coming from. You are a leader in that country. Every person in that country is your subject. The person that vote for you, including those that didn't vote for you, that is what makes a democracy to function. But in our case, we have people who they have invented a way of stealing and they continue to reinvent it. So anyway, I want, like I said before, we are moving towards the part of the solution. Now, the first question I really want to ask you there is that since by good leader, we are looking at a leader that is responsive towards the people, not you telling me, blowing some grammar to me that you are a good leader. I'm not interested in that. Let me see it in your people. How can we develop a people-oriented leadership in Africa?
Well, that has been the question that is riveting the minds of think tanks and also the move towards democracy and human rights. Trying to say Africa should democratize, Africa should have good leadership. Trainings has been given in different capacities in African universities and abroad in producing good African leaders. The problem we have in Africa today is, I mean, you can mention a few of them, like Idi Amin from Uganda, who was literally a butcher in his own country, Mengistu in Ethiopia, Taylor in Liberia. I can go on listing all these people. This is the legacy we have inherited from these people. The only way is education. You can't have a democratic system flourishing in any country unless you have educated people. Even in countries where we had education for a long period of time and when the majority of the population is educated, look at where Europe is going now towards populism, Hungary, Poland, so much so that the European Union is trying to ink them out of that union. So the problem is not only an African problem, it's a global problem. In the United States, you see the rise of racism. Racism, we can see it the day before yesterday, where Asians were literally butchered by somebody. The kind of hate that is being shown to Asians in the United States is tremendous. It's the same thing with blacks. I Cannot Breathe is a movement that was initiated by a white man who was sitting on the neck of a black man for, 7 minutes and killed him. So our world is getting to be very, very different from the kind of democratic credentials even some of the nations had. The United States have gone for more than 200 years in this. Europe, more than 400 years since the Renaissance. And Africa doesn't even have that kind of democratic credentials the way we define democracy today globally. So the idea of going back to African cultures, to Ubuntu that you mentioned, and to see how African local cultures and local governance systems can contribute towards the prosperity of Africa is a good move. But our historians, our anthropologists, our philosophers, our scientists, our public policy professionals, our public administration professionals and state leaders would have to work this. And it's a movement that we need to start for this. As you said, I lived in Nigeria for 3 years with 3 generators in my house for working for the United Nations. And it's a sad story. A country that's producing so much oil, probably the highest volume in Africa, didn't even have refined oil in its own country. The refiners were not working. It was importing refined oil after exporting crude oil. The power system is bad. The infrastructure is dilapidated. The kind of services you get in government were not good enough. President Obasanjo has done a lot of good work to be able to bring in Nigeria out of this military rule. But definitely it's going to need a lot of work that's going to take place in the coming generation. This is because if you see, even during the arena of the last presidency, there were billions that were supposed to be missing from the banks. And President Buhari came on a ticket to find this $20 billion. But we haven't heard anything about this. Maybe it's fake from the beginning. But Nigeria is a rich nation with poor people in its country. So these are areas that we need first is peace. In fact, after Obasanjo left, the biggest problem we have is Boko Haram. Frankly, you can live without electricity, but you cannot live with guns and bullets ringing in your ear every night, in northern Nigeria. But this is not specific to Nigeria. We have these problems everywhere. If you compare the security situation between Nigeria and Ghana, Ghana is more or less peaceful now, next to Nigeria. But the point is, you never know when this upheavals of the youth, the kind of unemployment we have, university graduates who cannot find a job or cannot do anything, when they choose to use the power of the gun to address their grievances, then that's when the problem comes. Religious extremists, political extremists can use this use for different purposes, because once you have the power of the gun, you have the rule of law in your hands. And therefore, I think the African Union, other institutions in the continent, universities, have to work together to be able to create an African movement where we can produce good leaders. Take any country in Africa, there are always black spots in the history of that country. So much so the majority of people who are facing the international criminal court are Africans. And what did African leaders say? You're just focusing on Africa, you're not focusing anywhere. How can a court focus anywhere else when the criminals are in Africa? So the whole point is, in fact, they came together at the African Union and they say the ICC should not have any jurisdiction over Africa. And this is fake, This is the collection of leaders that want to go there until they die. And some of them, we don't even know when they die, frankly. It's in some countries, it's only, even after they're dead, it takes time for the people to know. And the level of transparency is so bad that these leaders, some of them, are gerontocrats who cannot even think about anything good. You've seen what happened in Algeria recently. The guy couldn't even talk at normal talk, but he was still the president of the country. So the interested groups who team up under the president are the ones that really make up the bulwark of the government in any situation.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. I don't know you also make notice of that. In that, some of the people we have in the position of authority, they are not really qualified. They are not qualified from many respects. For example, I pick up Nigeria. The reason I pick up because it's a very powerful country in Africa. It has a lot of resources. It also has a lot of potential to destroy the entire continent. If a war were to break out in Nigeria, a real war, even the country of Ghana you are saying stable will become destabilized because the forces will be too much. You cannot pour a basin of water into a small cup. It cannot take it. What I'm basically saying is that for the interest of Africa, some sizable country in the continent just need to be stable. Because when they are stable, then they can reach out to other countries. If Nigeria were a successful country, Pobiya will not continue to remain there and abuse his people. It will be impossible. Because the influence will reach there. But since this is a bad one, what can you do? Now, I have really taken the time to listen to my president, both past and present. In many of the occasions, I cannot bear it. I cannot listen. They cannot motivate you. And yet, they are the leaders. But if you go to look at other Nigerians that are speaking, you can see that these are the guys that know how to articulate. They are intelligent. They know what they are talking about. But they are never able to smell the position of leadership. The qualified people do not get there. But the unqualified people are the ones that are there. And it sort of appeared to me that because it is a game, somehow, somebody that is looking at the global system sort of say, okay, this is Africa, this is who they are. But it is not true. This is not who we are. We are just having the bad people representing us, and they are therefore speaking for us. But that is not who we are. We have very intelligent Nigeria who can really stand up and speak eloquently, talking only from the communication level. We are only talking of the communication level. People who should understand when they begin to sign contract, international contract, who should really understand the intricacies of the contract that they are signing, the implication of those contracts. If you cannot even talk, you cannot even talk to your population, how can you know the relevance of the contract that you are signing, giving away your land to the Chinese, for example? You see, all right, now, looking at always some of these little attributes of qualities of leadership, I think, like you also mentioned before, that it is very important that in the continent, we have a lot of schools that are teaching leadership as quality. So that by the time we bring in people to represent us, they should have been qualified. Not just because you are coming from a certain section of the country, or because you are worthy, or because your father was who knows what. You must be qualified. You must be in front of the people and talk to them. You know, I want to see a leader like Obama also in Nigeria. You know, okay, we cannot recreate him, but I'm looking at somebody who can really stand in front of me. By the time he finished to talk, I will say, yes, that is my leader. Not the one who cannot talk. Come on, how are you going to even start? So the question I'm asking you now, sir, is how do we promote leadership quality among younger Africans? Because that is the only hope we have. How do we do that?
Well, you see, that's a very difficult question, because if we take one country, for example, it might be much easier to explain. You mentioned Nigeria. Nigeria had a lot of intellectuals, very committed people who can run big corporations, people who have created media corporations, banks, and businesses who can really compete in the globalized world. There is no question about it. But how do you bring these people into the kind of state leadership to be able to lift society as a whole out of the kind of phenomenal poverty that Nigeria is in? I think this is important because, for one, most of these people might not be even interested, because political power is very brutal. There are times when people were being killed, for being in politics. And therefore, they want to just keep aside and do the good things they're doing in their own communities, in their own companies, in their own schools. The second thing is, there should be an initiative from a group of Nigerians who say, okay, now we have the different political parties, including PDP, who have been running the country since President Obasanjo was elected. But now we need a new vision for Nigeria. Nigeria's problem is Boko Haram. Nigeria's problem is electricity. Nigeria's problem is provision of water. Nigeria's problem is probably corruption. They should initiate political parties that are targeting the Nigeria's problems. I remember at one time when President Buhari was running against President Obasanjo as an opposition, he wanted the Muslim vote. And Nigerians rejected him for that. Even the Muslims rejected him. And therefore, people are conscious on what they want to do. The problem is that the choices that are presented are not good enough. So, and the choices to be presented to them, people cannot bring them unless the people themselves, the would-be leaders, come to the forefront and say, this is our agenda. We want to serve Nigeria. We want to take out Nigeria out of the deep problems we have. Nigeria, as you said, is an important country in Western Africa. It has been a stabilizing force, for example, in Sierra Leone and Liberia. Without Nigeria, these countries, I don't know what they would have been by today. But the point is, those intellectuals in Nigeria, those community leaders in Nigeria, those religious leaders in Nigeria should be able to come together and find and use, the platform of elections that come every 4 years to be able to bring good people into the Nigerian presidency. I remember President Obasanjo came as president after he left Obacha's prison. And even for his first term, it was the most difficult thing even to talk to the governors of states. Everybody is a kind of a warlord, if you like. In his second term, he improved this. But if you're going to bring democracy to Africa, which is supported by the majority of global developed nations, then the Nigerians themselves must present themselves to the electoral ballot so that they can come into the office and transform Nigeria. President Buhari, I mean, to be frank, he has been a military leader of Nigeria. Now he's the president of Nigeria. Don't we have other Nigerians who can do this job? Isn't one time heading Nigeria enough? This is not anything against Mr. Buhari. Maybe he had the vision of a better Nigeria, to build a better Nigeria. But where are the other Nigerians? And I think for each country in Africa, we can talk like this, where responsible people who have the capacity, who have the willingness, and who have the art of political leadership to come up and present themselves to the people that they are going to run the country to be more sustainable than it is now. The problem is only those people who have been in power before are the ones who want to come back, or the ones who want to continue to a third term, fourth term, indefinite terms. You've seen how the Egyptian government has now changed the constitution, where President Sisi will stay until 2034 as president of Egypt. And probably we will have another change of constitution by then if he's still alive to see it. So the point I'm trying to see is, instead of going through a violent means, for one, politicians should develop their political program. That should solve the country's problem, the community's problem. And then they should have the constituency to be able to support them in elections to go forward and find out. Look at the US elections. President Trump has created havoc in American society, where more than 500,000 Americans have died because of COVID-19. But yet he had 79 million American votes, which means this guy has prepared a constituency through the ideas that he's been selling to the American people. We can't find one African guy who can do this. On the contrary, those who are doing that are the ones who are working against communities. How does Boko Haram get fighters to be able to go and kill people, to be able to abduct girls from schools? And then we don't even know where these girls are anymore. Some of them might be back. But the point is, the chaotic guys know how to collect constituency. But the good guys, they don't know that, or probably they don't want to do that. And therefore, until well-meaning Africans who have the capacity, the kind of experience, the kind of skills to be able to govern, come up to the forefront and participate in the national politics, Africa is not going to change.
Well, it is true, because the change that we are waiting for, it had to come from us, or it's not going to come. We started the whole discussion with Ubuntu, with the collective existence, as it were. As a people, we are responsible for ourselves. No? If we don't understand this very basic principle of life, then it's going to be difficult for us. Because, of course, like it is currently, you also pointed it out, no? There is COVID-19 crisis. Africans are stretching their hands to the European Commission. Hey, give us money. Of course, I understand when you don't have enough, you can ask for help. But it's not really true that Africa don't have enough. It is not true. It's just the narration is very complicated. I was saying before, then I'm going to ask you the last question, then we will go, is that we need to be responsible. And for us to be responsible as country, we need to look for the people that can represent us well, people that can really represent us. It's not that I really have anything particularly personal about the person that is there as in the position of authority. That is not the point. The point is that you are speaking for millions of people. You are representing them. If you are not the best, you should not be there. It is not a favor that we elect a leader to lead over a people. Should not be a favor. It is because you are qualified to do it. You are prepared to take the sacrifice. You are prepared to lead the people. It is not a simple job. It is not something that people should just elect you to the office, then you go and stay inside a tinted car, a tinted house, and be enjoying. That is not what it is. It is a strong and difficult job. So be prepared for it if you really want to be a leader of a people. Because you are responsible for the life and death of millions of people. You are the one signing the contract. You are the one giving the order to the military. It is not a simple job. It is not a job for everybody. So as individuals, as Africans, we need to know that it is our responsibility, all of us, to do this. So the last question I really want to ask you, sir, is this one. How do we bring the spirit of Ubuntu, this very important and beautiful concept, into our leadership? How do we drive it in there so that it can be our guiding principle?
Well, you see, in the 60s, late 60s and early 70s, African students across African universities were preaching Marxism-Leninism as a solution to Africa. This went in and sank in very well with the African youth. And frankly, lots of revolutions were undertaken. And countries in Africa, some of them went to the West, others went to Moscow for help. And the kind of principles you see in Marxism-Leninism are taught to be at the time by African scholars closer to the African culture of Ubuntu, where we have equality, where the role of the state is not to manage society, but to support society. And of course, under Marxism, eventually the state would wither away and you'll have society running itself. So, but that kind of utopia is not within reach. Today, if we want to bring Ubuntu into the African governance culture, there are a lot we can learn from it. And the point is that some countries have tried to use it. When the Ethiopian government in 1995 introduced a constitution in which Ethiopia is going to be made up of nations, nationalities, and peoples, and that every nation, nationality, and people in Ethiopia would be given the opportunity for self-determination that includes secession, up to and including secession. This was the kind of vision where the founders of the Ethiopian constitution in 1995 wanted communities to be very independent. But instead, where has it sent us? It has gone into a civil war, literally, between ethnic communities. You might even see some ethnic groups are being cleansed out of some of the communities. So now, we're not living in enclosed African communities per se. We have had lots of interaction within communities within Africa and also with communities outside Africa. And therefore, we can take the principles of Ubuntu, and as I said earlier, we need historians and people of different caliber to come up with literally textbooks that can be used as to teach our young people. This kind of issues don't happen overnight. Like a president cannot adopt Ubuntu and create a different kind of governance system overnight. We have to build a generation of leaders based on these philosophies. And for this, I think we'll have to respect different cultures in Africa. We have to respect that African countries have different priorities, even their own populations, even between the Francophone and Anglophone Africa, between different countries in Africa, the relationship has been brutalized by different governments, by colonial administrations, and therefore it will be very important, one, to create that unique African identity that the founding fathers, in the name of Emperor Haile Selassie, Nkrumah, Nyerere, and others who came and penned this, Sekou Touré, these are the guys who had a vision to leave Africa with a unified concept. Now, several declarations by African head of states have come up also to create a united Africa, not only through trade relations and financial relations, but a politically united Africa. But that is far, far, far from being realized, because even silencing the guns for this year has become the biggest joke of the year internationally. And therefore, we need to have committed people within the organizations that serve Africa, be it the African Union, the regional economic communities, or other trade groupings like COMESA and others that have come and gone in this continent. The second thing is African leaders should be articulate enough to be able to present their positions to the world. Now, after COVID-19, even the European countries and the US are in a difficult position to provide any kind of aid to Africa. And therefore, now we know we are on our own. We have a problem of debt. So the survival even of African states most of the states is in question because they are indebted. They don't have foreign currency to bring in essential goods and services to their own population. Service industries and production industries in their countries are dying, and therefore this will lead only to more and more of conflicts. So we need African thinkers to come together, and people like yourself to be able to bring together people to have a broad view of what's really happening now, what can happen in the future, and what are the potential solutions that would emerge out of this consultation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I really, I really appreciate the time and the teaching that you have given us today. It's really invaluable. Before I conclude, I understand that you write. Is there something that you have that people can get? Maybe, I don't know, a book or some offer you have out there that people can find, or where can people find out more about you?
Well, I'm going to show you. Well, this is one of the books that I've written. It says Unleashing Africa's Resilience, and it's available in Amazon. Actually, it's 4 volumes. The other 4 volumes are coming up. So if anybody is interested, they can look at this book. And of course, I'll send you also where my publications are, the links, and therefore you can share it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks to all of you that have been listening to this interesting conversation. It has been really enriching for me personally. So I believe that you too, all of you, you have also benefited something from it. This is the situation. As a people, we need to take the bull by the horn. It's not all the time that we need to organize a revolution and start shooting. We need to start a kind of a self-sensitization. It may be the next person that is beside you, you can talk to the person and let the person have a positive look towards your reality, towards the collective existence that you have as a people, understanding the principle of Ubuntu. That could have been enough. You don't need to organize maybe the mass. But if you have the possibility, that is what you need to do. So the point is that it is our responsibility to change the system if we are not comfortable with the way it is. So I really want us to take this challenge. Do whatever we can. If you are a writer, write about it. We have a lot of beautiful history that people haven't known about. If you are a singer, sing about it. If you talk about it. If you are a teacher, teach about it. Wherever you are, that is where you are called upon to make positive contribution towards the life that we want in Africa.